Hello, and welcome to the Perry Connection. I'm your host, Jessie Barth. And I have to say that in the studio we have Arun Gandhi, and it is a thrill, not only for me, but for the whole village of Perry to have Arun Gandhi with us today.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's been a thrill having you in town today.
Thank you.
You spoke at the high school.
Yes, I did.
Can you
it was a wonderful experience.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your day at Perry High School, Perry Central?
Well, I was very pleasantly surprised because usually high school students are very rowdy and noisy, and I was surprised that they were very quiet and very well behaved, and it was wonderful. And the questions that they asked after the talk were really intelligent questions. So I think they did their homework well.
They did, and they were asking questions like gun control and
yes.
morality.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, very intelligent questions.
Yes. Well, let's just set the format for our discussion for the next half hour or so,
yes.
Which is you are a famous person in your own right. And we're going to talk about your life, but also your grandfather is almost of mythical proportions. He's so well known around the whole world that Mahatma Gandhi is, I think it's safe to say, is a household word.
Yes, I think so.
Yes. And so you having a very special relationship with your grandfather. We want to talk about that. But in our conversation this evening, we'd like to really focus on children. And your childhood, on your Gandhi for Children, and just the children of the world. So let's start out with you as a child with your very famous grandfather. Can we start with this photo right here, just to sort of set the stage here? How old are you there?
I think I'm about 5 or 6 at the time, and this was one of the earlier visits that we made just before World War II took place. And I don't remember a lot about that time when I was with grandfather, but I do remember a lot when I went for the second time when I was 12 years old, and the things that he taught me. And like you said, he is a legend, and his name is almost a household word. And when I was a teenager, I felt a little disturbed by that kind of a legacy because I didn't know how to deal with it. And people have very high expectations because you're grandson of Gandhi, so they were always comparing everything I did with grandfather, and it became a little burden to me. And I think one day I expressed this to my mother, and I said, I don't know how I'm going to go through life with this legacy, which is already becoming a burden for me. And she said, well, it's all up to you. If you think that this is a burden, it's just going to get heavier and heavier as you grow older. But if you look at this legacy as a light that is illuminating the path ahead for you, it'll be much easier for you to deal with it. And so since then, I've been looking at this legacy as a light that is showing me the way. And I think my mother was right. It is much easier to deal with.
That maternal wisdom.
Yes, it is.
Very important. And part of that, you made the decision to go with the light.
Right.
And this is a book that you've written that if anyone is interested, they can purchase this online through your website, Gandhi for Children.
Right.
Correct? Mm-hmm. And this is called a legacy of love. And that really is the light that your mom was talking about.
Yes, indeed, because that is the philosophy of my grandfather. His philosophy of nonviolence is all about love and mutual respect and understanding and appreciation of each other. So, it's the choice today between the culture of violence, which is about hate and prejudice and killing and destruction, against the non-violence, which is about love and respect and understanding and appreciation. And so this is the choice that we are faced with right now, and I hope that we as people of the world will make the right choice.
Yes. Well, it's interesting you're talking about love and respect and the legacy, because we saw that today in the high school.
Yes, we did.
It was so exciting because before you even walked in, the auditorium was quiet.
Mm-hmm.
The students, it was almost like they were in church,
Yeah.
and they had such respect for their understanding of your place, and to me that's that's sort of a quiet understanding of the place of love.
Exactly.
And the role of it and the need for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so children listening to this show, they can identify with love. We all need it.
We all do
want
need it, yes. Love is now, it's almost like a dirty four-letter word when it shouldn't be. It's all about life itself, and so we should bring it back into our lives and give it the respect and appreciation that we need to do in life. So it's all about how we take care of our children. And I feel very disturbed by the fact that in modern society we have gotten so deeply into materialism and our careers and the need to earn more money, and it's everything about money, that we are breaking up family relationships. Mm-hmm. Children are growing up with strangers in daycare, and parents have very little time for their children. And so that, if the family breaks up, then there won't be any cohesive society. Because if children don't learn to respect their parents and respect each other at home, they're not going to respect anybody outside. They're not going to respect. So it has to begin at home. We have to show the respect and love for our children. We have to show them that we are willing to make whatever sacrifice necessary for them, so that we can have that kind of a cohesive family. And when the children learn that at home, they translate that in society, and their relationship with others in society also becomes one of love and respect.
It's like in a classroom.
It's like in a classroom.
And if you want to be treated with respect, you treat your classmates with respect.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about your childhood.
Yeah, I grew up in a family that believed in nonviolence. My father was the second son of the Mahatma, and he had devoted his entire life to practicing nonviolence at home as well as in his public life there.
When you say that, what do you mean or how did they discipline you?
Well, for instance, they in the culture of nonviolence, they said there's no place for punishment, and what we need to do is do penance for the mistakes of the children. That is, taking the responsibility on themselves for the mistakes that the children commit. By doing that, they were showing us that there was a tremendous amount of respect and love for us. And I want to share with you one story that happened to me when I was a teenager. And, my parents, as I said, they never believed in punishment. So whenever my two sisters and I did any mistakes or did something wrong, we were not punished. They did penance instead. And usually the penance took the form of fasting for a day or 2 days, depending on how serious.
They didn't eat for 2 days.
Yeah. It depended on how serious the offense was. And so that was the tradition in the family. But when I was 16 years old and had just come back from India, I had lived with grandfather for 2 years and learned very important lessons from him. And we were living in an ashram in a community that my grandfather had created when he was living in South Africa. And that community was in the wilderness. It was about 18 miles outside the city of Durban, in the midst of sugarcane plantations. And when my grandfather left, much of the community left with him. So when I was born, there were very few families and nobody had any children of my age. So we didn't have anybody to play with and have fun with. So we would look forward to going into town and visiting friends and seeing a movie or something. And we didn't get this opportunity very frequently because in those days, firstly, driving 18 miles was not very easy. Today we drive 80 miles to go and have dinner somewhere. But in those days it wasn't so easy. And especially because my parents had adopted voluntary poverty. And so our budget was always very limited, and we had to spend on essentials and not on frivolous expenses. So we didn't get these opportunities to go to town very frequently. And whenever we did, we would grab the opportunity and go. And I remember one Saturday when my dad had to attend a conference in town, and he didn't feel like driving that day, and he asked me if I would drive him into town. And I jumped at the opportunity and said yes. And since I was going into town, my mother gave me a list of groceries that she needed. And on the way into town, my father reminded me of all these little chores that had been pending for a long time, like getting the car serviced and oil changed and all that. And he said, since you have the whole day to yourself, will you handle all these things? And I said, okay. And when I dropped him off at the conference venue, he said, at 5 o'clock, I will wait for you outside this auditorium. You come and pick me up and we'll go home together. And I said, fine, and I rushed off and I did all my chores and I bought all the groceries and did everything I was expected to do. And being a 16-year-old, I went straight to the nearest movie theater. And I got so engrossed in a John Wayne double feature that I didn't realize the passage of time. The movie ended at 5:30, and I ran from there to the garage and got the car and rushed to where my dad was waiting for me. I think I reached there about 6 in the evening. It was 1 hour late, and he was naturally anxious and wondering what happened to me. And he was pacing up and down. And so the first question he asked me is, why are you late? And I was so ashamed to tell him the truth that I lied to him, and I said, the car wasn't ready. I had to wait for the car, not realizing that he had already called the garage and asked them. And when he caught me in the lie, he said, there's something wrong in the way I brought you up that didn't give you the confidence to tell me the truth. You felt you had to lie to me. And I've got to find out where I went wrong with you. And in order to do that, he said, I'm going to walk home 18 miles. I'm not coming with you in the car. There was absolutely nothing I could do to make him change his mind. He just started walking. It was after 6 in the evening. It was getting dark, and no lights, dirt roads through sugarcane plantations. I couldn't leave him and go away. So I was crawling behind him for nearly 6 hours.
In the car, driving.
In the car, watching him go through the pain and agony for a stupid lie that I uttered. And I decided then and there that I was never going to lie again. And I think that's a very profound lesson in nonviolent parenting. If he had punished me the way we would punish our children for misbehaving, I think I would have just suffered the punishment and gone on doing the same thing, just making sure the next time I'm not stupid enough to get caught. So, there's a lot to be said about nonviolence and how we adopt it.
And that's getting back to love again.
It's getting back to love.
And he loved you enough to have to walk 18 miles
exactly
to teach you that lying doesn't pay.
Right.
Well, we have a photograph of your family here. Okay, there we are. Can you tell us your parents' names and your sisters?
My father was Manilal, my mother is Sushila, my older sister is Sita, and the younger sister is Ela.
And look at you, so handsome.
Thank you.
So handsome. So you grew up in South Africa.
I did. I was born and brought up in South Africa, and I grew up there. And as I said earlier, my parents adopted voluntary poverty. So we never had a lot of money, and So when we were growing up, one thing that I remember was we didn't have any toys
No
to
toys.
play with. We were taught to make our own toys, to use scrap things and make toys there. And I remember that we used to make those mini cars with those old matchboxes that we collected, empty matchboxes, and we would use the matchsticks as axles and use shirt buttons as the wheels and build.
How creative.
Creative, yes. And then my mom used to teach us to make figurines with clay. We had a stream running through the farm,
There's
and
a
there
picture
was a
of
lot
your
of clay there.
mom
And
again.
we would use the clay to make animal figures and human figures, and my mom was very good at it, and so she used to teach us and that was how we we learned and we played, had fun.
Well, and you told me at dinner that you had a special pet because of your mother.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us?
My mother used to be very fond of going and rescuing animals in distress, and she one day she had found a little newborn kitten in the farm, and she couldn't find the mother anywhere, and so she brought the kitten home. And the kitten was so small that she couldn't drink milk from the saucer. And so my mother used to dip cotton wool into the milk and pour it into the kitten's mouth. And then the cat survived and grew up, and she got the taste of cotton. And the next thing we realized was she was chewing up our blankets. And we had to wean her out of doing that, but we destroyed many blankets because they had gaping holes in there.
The cat
During
liked
the
the
night,
cotton.
the cat would come and would chew it up there. But the one funny little incident was that once she was on the farm and she saw an African man carrying a little baby monkey, the rhesus monkey, and my mom stopped him and asked him what he's going to do with the monkey. And he said, well, I'll wait till it grows up a little bit and then I'll eat it. And African people did that because of poverty. They would get food from wherever they found it. So my mom said, no, you're not going to eat that monkey. And she paid him 10 shillings and brought the monkey home and gave it to me as a pet. And says, from now you look after this monkey. And so I had this strange pet, but I loved it because it was very cute. And that monkey would sleep with me at night, crawl under my sheets and go right down to my feet and snuggle up there and sleep. And then in the morning it would get up early in the morning, sit on the pillow and look for lice in my hair. And I found that she used to get very annoyed, and she would dig and chatter away very angrily, and I didn't know what was happening. So I told my mom, I said, what do I have on my head that makes her so annoyed with me there? And she looked there and she found that I had 2 black moles on the head there, and the monkey thought that that was lice and she couldn't get the lice out from there. And so it was a very funny thing, but I had that monkey for nearly 10 years, and it was a wonder, it was a wonderful pet, and I miss her a lot. One thing that happened during that time was my dad built a school for poor children in the neighborhood, and I think one day one of the kids teased the monkey or something, and the monkey nipped the hand of the child, and the little blood came out from there. And so my dad got scared and said, if this happens more frequently, there might be some serious accident. So he built a huge cage for the monkey, and it was decided that every morning before the school children came, we would lock the monkey into the cage, and after the children went home, we would release the monkey. So after the first day, when I successfully caught her and put her in the cage, she realized what was going to happen.
Smart monkey.
And from the next day, she would, the moment she saw that I was awake and ready to get out of bed, she would jump across and look up at me, and every time I would stoop down to pick her, catch her, she would jump again and go a little further and look up at me again. And she would take me around the whole 100-acre farm, and then come and jump onto my shoulder and say, okay, now you can take me into the cage. That was the ritual every day that I had the monkey, and had to go around with the monkey all over the 100-acre farm and then put her in the cage.
I bet that monkey loved you.
Yeah,
Just that
I loved
beautiful
her and
relationship.
she loved me, yes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of love, I have a beautiful picture here of your wife, Sunanda,
Yes.
and who was a nurse, and you met her in the hospital. And you went on then to, let's talk about your work in India and how you helped abandoned children. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I didn't anticipate living in India. I went to India in 1956 after my father died prematurely. He was only 64 years old then. And I think it was all the hardships and the tortures that he suffered in the prisons in South Africa.
And he was in prisons because?
Because he opposed apartheid and campaigned against these prejudices and injustice.
Which kept people of different races apart.
Yeah. Okay. And so he spent a lot of time in prisons, and I think it was that, the aftermath of all that really had a toll on his life, on his health, and he died at the age of 64. But when he died, my mother said that I should take his ashes to India and immerse them in the river Ganges, and also take the opportunity to speak with my uncles to decide my future, whether I wanted to continue living in South Africa and do what my dad did, or whether I wanted to branch out into something else there. So while I was in India and having these discussions with my uncles, I had a severe attack of appendicitis and had to undergo surgery. And I fell in love with my nurse, and of course she wouldn't believe who I was, and then of course when she began to believe me, she said, well, we can't have any relationships because it's unethical to have relationships with patients. So I got myself discharged from the hospital as quickly as possible. And I said, now I'm not your patient anymore, so what? And she still resisted me. And then finally, after many weeks of attempting to get a date, she agreed to meet me for a movie in the afternoon and an early dinner. And she said she had to be back in the hospital before 8:30. So I said, okay. And I went, and we had arranged that she would meet me outside the theater in the city of Mumbai, which is a huge city. And she would be there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I got there just before 3 and waited and waited and waited, and she didn't turn up till 5:30. And I thought all the time that she must have had some emergency at the hospital and must be delayed there, so I'll wait a few more minutes, and just waited there, and 5:30, and I was beginning to get anxious, and then I see her coming off the bus. And I asked her, I said, did you have an emergency? Is that why you were late? And she said, yes. And so we let it be, and we just had an early dinner, and I took her back to the hospital. But after that, when I proposed to her and she accepted me, that is when she confided that she didn't have any emergencies that day. She was just too scared to come and meet me. And so she got dressed and was sitting in her dorm room, not stirring out from there until her roommate came and kicked her out of the room and said, you go and
you
meet
go on
him.
that date.
Otherwise you're not coming back into this room. And so she came, and she didn't expect to see me there almost 2.5 hours after the time. And she was surprised to see me waiting.
You had learned
there.
patience.
I had learned patience from my parents.
And it paid off. And we have another photo that you brought of your daughter who lives in the Rochester area,
Right.
which is why you're here in Western New York. And one of the reasons why we were able to have you come to Perry. She's beautiful. And what is her name?
Her name is Archana, which means an offering to God.
Oh, beautiful. And then you have a son that lives...
I have a son, Tushar,
India.
who lives in India.
And you have 4 grandchildren?
4 grandchildren, 2 boys from my daughter, and 2 from my son, a son and a granddaughter. And she's my princess.
She's beautiful. Kasturi is actually with us in the studio. And
Yes, she is.
It's been a pleasure to spend time with her. So you and Sunanda have, you spent your lifetime really helping other children.
Yes, and you can't help but see all the poverty and destitution in India when you live there. And because of the way we were brought up, I was brought up in a household that believed in non-violence, and so there was a lot of compassion for people in distress. And my wife, also being a nurse, had a lot of compassion for people. And so we teamed up, and after we got married, we had a talk about this, and we decided that we could either both work and make a lot of money, and which neither of us really wanted, or one person could work and support the family and the other would do social work. And because she was a nurse, she decided she would do the social work because she could use her medical experience to help the poor people and teach them about the hygiene and so on. So that's what we did for nearly 30 years. And there were various programs that we instituted there for women and for children especially. Children suffer a lot in poverty. They have no means of getting out of that situation.
It's a cycle, isn't it?
It's a cycle.
They just grow into it.
Yeah, it goes deeper
perpetuate.
and deeper, and it's very painful to see this. And there was one incident that really hit me very hard, and that was when I was coming home from work on a train, and there was a little boy, I would say he wasn't more than 5 years old. He was dressed in rags and dirty, and he had a little tin can of homemade candy, and he was imploring people to buy the candy. And I was intrigued by this fact that, first of all, I wouldn't dare put my 5-year-old kid alone on a train in a city like Bombay. And second, why does this kid like that have to sell candies? So my station was coming, and I told the kid, I said, come off the train with me. I want to talk with you. And I took him off, and we spoke, and he told me a very sad story that every morning his mother would give him this tin full of candy that she made, and the instructions were that he had to sell all the candies and bring the money home. Only then he would get food to eat. And
For
when
the
I
day.
met him, only when he brought the money home. And when I met him, it was past 5 o'clock in the evening, and he still had half a tin full of candy. And I wondered, I said, if he hasn't eaten all day and he won't be able to eat until he gets home and gives the mother money, and he still has half a tin full of candy, when is he going to eat and what is he going to eat? And I felt that I could buy all that candy that day and help him out. But what is he going to do tomorrow and the day after and so on? And I said, no, we need to find a more lasting solution to this, not just a Band-Aid therapy. And that's how I got involved in creating this institution to rescue these children and give them some means to get out of the cycle of poverty. But there also we had another experience, that when we rescued children from homes like this and gave them the means to get out of poverty, gave them education and so on, we found that we were alienating them from their parents, that they were so ashamed of going back to their homes and going back to their parents that they broke away from them and would go away to the cities and leave their parents still living in poverty there. So this time around, what we decided to do is to try to rescue the whole family. While giving the education to the children, we would also rescue the parents and teach them some vocation that they can use to make something and earn something from there. So this is a very ambitious program, and we have started. We already have about 140 children, and we are working with some of their parents also, and we are hoping that this will expand and grow. And if this model succeeds, then we will replicate it elsewhere also.
How, if someone watching the show wants to contribute and help you with the school, can you give us the website and how they can contribute?
Yeah, it's a simple website. The address is gandhiforchildren.org, and they can get all the information there on the website. They can also donate money and buy books and all that to support, because all the income from the books that I've written are going to help these children. Every penny of it goes to help these children.
It helps the children and their family.
And their family.
That's really lifting a whole family out of poverty.
Right.
And so what a legacy. When you think of your grandfather, what he started, that families are still being uplifted.
Yeah, I think, it's important for us to remember that we may not be able to solve the world's problems entirely, but we can at least make a beginning and solve small problems and help few people there. And so all of us can do something. We shouldn't feel helpless there.
Even our children, even the children in this country.
I had this wonderful experience a couple of years ago. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I went and spoke at a middle school, and I was telling them about these poor kids that I had rescued. And after the talk, the children came to me and they said, "We want to do something to help them. What can we do?" So I told them that, I said, your parents give you some pocket money every day, and you use it to buy something that you don't really need. You buy soda or some candy or something. You don't really need that, but because you have the money, you go and buy it. So I said, suppose you make a decision that you're going to spend only half that money for yourself and save the other half of the money for helping a poor child. And all of you together in the entire school, I think they had about 250 students or something, and all of you decide and pool your money together, you can raise a lot of money. And they loved the idea, and the teachers helped them. So these children saved a part of their pocket money and created a pool. They also had bake sales, and they made T-shirts and sold the T-shirts, and they did all kinds of things and raised the money. And I was amazed that within a few months they sent me a check for $4,000.
Wonderful.
All these kids just contributed to themselves, and that's why I feel, and I recently wrote an article which is posted on my website. I said, if we have 100,000 people who decide to donate $1 every day or every week, we can have $100,000 every week to help children somewhere in the world.
That's right.
And that's a lot of money. It can translate into a lot of money and saving a lot of children.
And real help.
Real help.
Real help.
And I think this is what we all need to understand, that we shouldn't be selfish.
That's right.
And keep things just for ourselves, but we need to remember that the security of any country is dependent on the security of the world. We cannot live in isolation.
That's right.
We cannot say that we in America, we are rich, we are powerful, and we can live in isolation and let the rest of the world go down the tube. If the rest of the world is going down the tube, we are going down with them.
That's right.
So our security really depends on the security of the whole group. Yeah.
It's a group.
So I think all of us need to get involved in trying to do what little we can to save this world.
Thank you. Thank you for that legacy of love. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your life, for your sacrifice.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. And I do hope you'll be back in Perry, and we'll have you on again.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Great, thank you. And thank you for joining us.